That's right, everybody. We're back. Ramblers Radio is back this week, or should I say Rambler Radio, because it's just me. Code is nowhere to be found, but that's okay. We're just running on busy schedules. For me, I am not so much right now, so we are back. We got a lot of news to cover today, so it's going to be a shorter episode. No short segments or anything like that. We're going to cover some really positive news as well as some that is not so positive. And it might be pretty difficult to talk about. But you know what's not difficult? Subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and giving us a rating on Spotify. It would sure help us out tremendously. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it, y'all. First news we got is a leak. We have the leak of the next animated Star Wars show, which has been leaked from a job opening at Lucasfilm, seeking a shop production coordinator for the project. I'm getting this from Screen Rant. If you guys didn't know, Dave Filoni has listed the new animated Star Wars show that is set to expand on the time post-Republic for the clones. That includes maybe characters like Captain Rex, characters like Echo, during the time of the Bad Batch. According to Screamrat, after exploring the fall of the Republic and early days of the Empire through the eyes of the clones for 3 seasons, Star Wars The Bad Batch came to a conclusion, resolving in the latest animated series. Now, Lucasfilm has seemingly set its sights on developing the next long-form animated series. As revealed by a listing on Disney Careers, Lucasfilm Animation is currently in search of a shop production coordinator to aid with the animation on their next series. While no other hints were given towards what the series could be, the listing could be for the next long-running series as opposed to an anthology like Tales of the Jedi / Empire, since it highlights other long-form shows like Bad Batch. A lot to unpack. Whenever we hear about a leak of a new show, we of course have to keep into context of when we could expect it to release. And as for the next couple years, it's kind of unclear outside of a few projects. Only things that we do know is that, of course, the Acolyte Season 1 is finishing up this week. If you guys don't know, I'm recording this on Monday, July 15th. So the Acolyte finale will release tomorrow night. And then as far as other projects, the only things that we know set in stone, we do have Andor Season 2 coming out, I believe, 2025. I believe that's when that will be. And then we do have the Mandalorian Grogu movie coming out in 2026, as well as Ahsoka Season 2, somewhere around that period. And don't ask me about Skeleton Crew. I don't know much about it because the leaks have been all over the place, and we just don't know. That's one of the Star Wars series that have just been out of the loop a little bit. So if we were to give an estimate, what we do know is that Lucasfilm has been pretty good. Lucasfilm Animation specifically has gotten these series out faster than we would probably think. Like if we keep it into context, the Bad Batch Season 1 aired in 2021. And then Season 2 came out about a year and a half later, beginning of 2023. And then Season 3 began just a year after that, 2024. And then other ones, of course, the anthologies, they're short series. So, they're not as easy or not as hard to make, as far as that goes. My expectations on this show is not going to flop. I know a lot of Star Wars fans have been all over the place as far as seeing which other seasons or shows, like, oh, which one is this going to flop? This one flop. It's just been as divisive as it's ever been. And it's been this divisive for, I don't know, the past 6 or 7 years. We just got to see what it is. But something that I myself have been sort of believing is that animation has been consistent. It has been great. Say what you want about Tales of the Empire. Not a lot of people like that. I personally just didn't really care for it. The Bad Batch, I believe, was great. I thought it was a great show, along with the conclusion of the Clone Wars, which is going on 4 years ago. That, of course, to me was fantastic. I just think animation, ever since they started it back with the Clone Wars, after sort of the thing of with Rebels, but that's like its own separate thing. The continuation of Lucasfilm Animation specifically, and not Disney XD, I think has been really good, and I just don't expect that the show has any chance to flops. Personally, it does seem like it's going to have a lot of connecting events to the Bad Batch. We're probably going to see most of the main characters should be expected to be some of the main characters that we saw in the Batch. Like, it's basically confirmed that Rex will be the main character, along with guys like Echo, Hauser, perhaps, and then we'll probably see Wolf as well. So, do what you will with that. But yeah, that's mainly my sort of thoughts. A lot of fans' critiques on the Bad Batch is that, or I wouldn't say specifically critiques, but more so of what fans wanted to see more. They wanted to see Rex and the Clone Rebellion a lot more, which makes sense because that is, of course, a very cool concept that has transitioned from Legends, and they're trying to make it more into a canon content. But then something that I seem to just bring up every time is that it would have sort of would have taken away from the story of the Batch themselves, which is something that we sort of expected. Like, we sort of expected the Rex and his crew to show up in the very finale of the show on Tantus. That ended up not happening. But that ended up being okay, because I think that would have ended up taking away from the Batch's story, which we know. We definitely know that we're probably not going to see the Batch again, and that would have been, would have taken away even a little bit more if they showed up. But they are going to have this show with them. We're unclear is if it will branch farther. I assume they would branch farther through after the Batch's story, because we did get a little bit of setup on Pabu in the very last moments of the show, but that remains to be seen. Overall, I do believe that this show is going to be a hit. A lot of show that is focusing on the Clone War, or the aftermath of the Clone War, basically on war itself. But that's not the only war that we have in this. We also have the war amongst Star Wars fans, and this is going to be the longer segment for sure. So the Acolyte Season 1, or maybe even the Acolyte in general, is concluding tomorrow. The Acolyte has been, if in case you have been living under a rock, which a lot of people do, unfortunately, the Acolyte has been the most divisive and controversial Star Wars project in recent memory, since the inception of Disney Plus, basically. It's been the most divisive Star Wars show by a very, very wide margin. Nothing else has really come close ever since the time of the sequel trilogy. And now we are getting news about potential for a season 2 of the show, which a lot of people do not like, and some people do like. I will say that a lot of people do have divisive opinions on the show, and they're entitled to their own opinion, of course. When I say my opinions, I'm not going to speak for the entire thing. But if you want my opinion, this show has just been kind of a blob to me. It just seems like something has just been a lot of things about the show have been so unappealing. Most of the characters to me just don't really seem too appealing. Don't really seem to have any sort of clinging nature to them, like how we would be like emotionally attached to them. Only like I wouldn't really say any of the characters, in my opinion, don't really qualify as that. And then another thing is that the plot is kind of all over the place, and not only that, but a majority of the acting in the show I gotta say, has not been very impressive. And say what you want about the hiring of the actors, but I'm not gonna criticize them as a whole. But as far as their work in this show, I just don't really think that it's been impressive. I'm gonna read from a Forbes article that was published today or yesterday. My bad. Yesterday afternoon. This is by Paul Tassi on Forbes. Title: Why the Acolyte Season 2 Seems Increasingly Unlikely. So without even looking at it, I will say that Season 2, the reason why it could be extremely unlikely is one, this first season has been very unpopular. So if they were to just come up to Season 2, how profitable would they really be of the season? And then two, they spent a really large budget on this first season. According to many sources, season 1 of The Acolyte put in at a $180 million budget, which is quite a lot and a very high standard in terms of live action Star Wars projects. It has a higher budget than even some of the more recent Disney movies that Disney has produced and with Lucasfilm. So without my input, we can go ahead and go through this. The Acolyte has quickly become one of the most controversial Disney Plus Star Wars projects in the entire era, right up there with The Last Jedi. Of course, that is definitely not a debate there. But all of the hate and or support aside, there's a simple question: will the Acolyte get a season 2? Yes. Ever since the last few episodes, he continues to ramble on with his personal opinion of the show, which of course he's entitled to have, as long as he cites his name. It's not about the show being woke or being bashed by Star Wars YouTubers and their audiences. I can name a couple that have definitely been the driving point for that. Rather, it's pretty simple: cost versus viewership. Yes, this is the point that goes across. Because of how unpopular the first season has been, the devotion of cost for a second season, it just seems like it wouldn't be worth it. A lot of fans are just not going to watch the second season because of how much they have disliked the first season. And it just, I don't know, it just seems like Disney wouldn't even go into it outside of good or bad. All that Disney and Lucasfilm have really paid attention to has been viewership. Good or bad reviews aside, viewership is what brings in the profits, and that is what they invest all of this budgeting towards. So we will go into these later ones. Estimates of the cost the Acolyte put in at $180 million for what they effectively for what are effectively 8 30-minute episodes. That is another thing. 8 30-minute episodes for a large of a budget like that, as far as time length, it just doesn't really it's never made sense to me. It's not, and I know I'm sort of stuttering on that topic, but it doesn't really make sense for why this deserved so much, and for so much advertisement as well. That is definitely another thing that has definitely boosted the budget. For why that budget was boosted in the first place is because they've put so much advertisement in the show. That's an absolutely wild amount of money for a Star Wars thing that is nowhere near theaters, but rather the 6th Disney live-action Star Wars series instead. And while I think the show has a solid aesthetic, no, it does not look like an $180 million project. And you have to wonder where much of that money went. Like I said, a lot of the money definitely went towards advertising. And outside of that, where did the budget actually really go to? Like lightsabers, cool. Sort of the settings, I guess, but it's just not something that you can think of. And a lot of other content creators for Star Wars have definitely pointed out things or like missed opportunities that they could definitely invest the budget into, and they just didn't do it. And that's another big critique that they've had for the show. So continuing on, then there's viewership, where if it has a breakout smash hit, it might be worth spending that for another season. but it's just not there based on what we know. Disney does not give out official numbers, but Nielsen says its premiere was half the viewership of Ahsoka and 75% lower than The Mandalorian. Making sense. Of course, The Mandalorian was, of course, the premiere show for Disney Plus, premiere Star Wars show, for Disney Plus. So that is definitely one of the hooks as far as new content when Disney Plus was first releasing. Continuing on the quote, reportedly, it's the second least watched show, also behind The Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan. I cannot imagine it surged in popularity from there. Of course, the least watched show, without any of that, it could be just inferred at the point. The least watched show is Andor, which I consider to be at least a top 2 live action Star Wars project. I think the first season of Andor was tremendous, and a lot of things that some fans, specifically even older fans, is that they don't think that Lucasfilm is putting the budgets in the right places, and that it seems like shows like Andor and early Mandalorian deserved more than that of, the Acolyte, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and whatnot. Excuse me. Before you say, well, it's just so bad, that's why viewership is low, you should just know the least watched show is Andor, universally praised as one of the best things in Star Wars history, even past the Disney era. Yes, that is definitely a sort of counterpoint that has just been reversed by Forbes. Good job, Paul Tassi, on pointing that out. It did, in fact, get a season 2, however, on a reported $250 million budget. Yes, they saw how well-reviewed Disney, well-reviewed the show got, and Disney is now investing a higher budget. Disney might have been okay doing that once given the sky-high reviews and massive praise for it. So, to me, it seems like Disney cares about 2 things. If the viewership is not so high, but the reviews are very high, that's great. If you get bad reviews on stuff, okay, sure. But if the viewership is high, cool. That just seems like the 2 sides of a coin that they really do care about. And even though it does make sense after a little while of thinking, it's just not something that I personally believe they should be invested in. It doesn't matter the viewership. The viewership only gets you so far. It's the high rated reviews that definitely do give you a lasting life in this business. And that's what I think that should be their top priority. Andor was a definitely perfect example for that. Continuing on, Disney might have been okay doing that once given sky-high reviews and massive praise for it, but the Acolyte certainly doesn't have that. And no one is saying it's anywhere close to the quality of Andor. Absolutely. I don't think... I've seen a lot of reviews for the Acolyte, I will say. And I have to say, I have not seen any reviews that have said it's like near perfect or like very great. I've seen stuff that says that it is very bad, amongst the worst Star Wars I've ever seen. I would say that I'm personally in one of those spheres. People just say it's very mediocre, and some say that they personally like it, but they do understand that not a lot of people like it. Yes. And then continuing on, it's pretty easy to understand why those shows are the least watched in Disney history. They lack any and all characters that people would recognize from other Star Wars. Yes, of course. So we think about the six main live action Star Wars shows. We've started off with The Mandalorian, of course. Mandalorian is, of course, a new character. So people were wondering, like, oh, how is this show going to get high reviews and stuff? But then they introduced a miniature baby Yoda, and that's what got all the sales. That's what got all the toys, the plushes, whatnot, and it became so popular with children. And then, of course, adults liked the Mandalorian as a character, so they really enjoyed that. Going on, the other ones, of course, we had the Book of Boba Fett, which is, of course, followed up on Boba Fett, a mysterious character from the original trilogy that we don't get a lot of exploring for as far as his adult version. Of course, we see him in the Clone Wars and whatnot, but we don't really have exploration about that, and then we don't have any fulfillment on the legend that he survived the Sarlacc pit. Of course, he did, and we figured out why. That show wasn't really received well enough because, one, they don't like what they did to Boba Fett as a character, and two, they don't really like how Din Djarin and the Mandalorian basically took over the show. Moving on, the third one was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Of course, very, very anticipated show that was pretty much leaked way back as far as 2017. I'm pretty sure that's how far away it was. And of course, got announced at Disney 23 Expo in 2020, and then of course it came out 2022. People did not really like Obi-Wan Kenobi for the main reason that it didn't focus highly enough on the conflict between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. Excuse me. And then they also didn't really like Reva Savander the third sister Inquisitor, as a character. Excuse me, I got a cough going. So yeah, those are the main ones. That show to me does have some high points, though. I really like Vivian Lyra Blair as Leia. I think she did a fantastic job, and as well as the conflicts between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, I think are done perfectly. Besides, being so limited. Of course, the fourth show I believe was Andor, and people weren't really invested into Andor because, one, the advertisement was not very high, and two, he's based off of a character. He's not even the main character of Rogue One. You're making a whole live action show of a side character. It wasn't really thought of popularly, even though the ideas, the concepts, and the themes are very similar to Rogue One, and that's why I believe the show did so good, and that's why I believe I really like the show a lot. The fifth show was Ahsoka, which is basically a live-action version of adult Ahsoka that is following up on the story of Rebels, which is something that we've just needed, as far as not only following up on Ahsoka's story, but her conflict with Anakin Skywalker and seeing Thrawn in live action, along with many of the main Rebels characters in live action. That show was decently reviewed. A lot of people didn't like it, but a lot of people like me, of course, did really like it a lot. And then here we have The Acolyte, which is expanding way before the prequel trilogy, based in the High Republic era, which is the era that Disney has created. And it's something that it's a sort of period in history that they are trying to expand on because it's their creation. They started doing it in media projects outside of their novels and books and everything, which I myself have not looked into very high. They first branched into sort of mainstream media in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the video game, which came out in 2023. I thought they did a pretty decent job setting the standard there, and then now they're in The Acolyte. And even though I don't think being in the High Republic era is the problem, I just think that, the content within it, outside of, the existential stuff, I think that's just the main problem with that. Yeah. Paul Tassi goes along and explains some of that stuff. I kind of just ramble on. And then he states a few signs of hope for season 2. One, Wesley Haslam clearly has a story mapped out for future seasons. I really don't think that people would really trust this because the map that she set for season 1 has not been really well received. And so it doesn't really look like that's a good reason in my book. Number 2, Disney has a lot riding on the High Republic era being theirs to build out. And so far, there's only been done through books. I'm sure they want more shows and movies outside of Jedi Survivor, which I guess they forgot, which is because it's not necessarily mainstream media. It's a video game. But yeah, that is a good reason. I do think that they are going to expand more on the High Republic because, it's basically their baby, their trust. They did, in fact, greenlit, and then number 3, sorry for going too prematurely, they did, in fact, greenlight Andor Season 2 with a huge budget, so they may do it again if they aren't done overspending on Star Wars and Marvel projects like this. Marvel is a a different discussion that we don't really talk about, and they're facing a lot more drama with their overproduction and sort of lack of high reviews. But Star Wars is, of course, dealing with that problem, just much on a much lighter sense because they don't nearly produce as much content. Do what you want with that. Andor was greenlit for a season 2 because of how well season 1 did. And plus, I'm pretty sure it's because Diego Luna wanted to map that out. We also needed to see why, or the reasons of how Cassian Andor met up with Mon Mothma and started within the rebellion on Yavin. So yes, that's pretty much that for that. We will just have to see what the season 1 finale of the Acolyte means for it. But other than that, that is all the news I wanted to talk about. Just briefly share my thoughts of. Thank you for tuning in for this segment of Ramblers Radio. One more time, just to remind you, subscribe to the channel. Please like the episode or rate it if you are on Spotify. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.